Let's turn our attention to the Democratic Republic of Congo. As the country moves to tighten control over cobalt exports, President Felix Tshisekedi has issued a warning.
The Democratic Republic of Congo just reminded the world that the green energy transition runs through African soil, and Western governments are scrambling to figure out what happens when the country supplying over 70% of the world's cobalt decides it's done exporting raw minerals for pennies, while others profit in billions. To understand why markets panicked when Congo announced restrictions on mineral exports, you need to understand what's buried under Congolese soil. The DRC holds approximately 70% of the world's cobalt reserves and about 50% of global cobalt production. Cobalt is essential for lithium-ion batteries that power electric vehicles, smartphones, laptops, and virtually every portable electronic device. Without cobalt, the batteries overheat, degrade faster, and lose capacity. There's no large-scale alternative yet that works at the same cost and performance level. Congo also produces significant amounts of copper, which is crucial for EV motors, charging infrastructure, and electrical wiring. The country holds about 10% of global copper reserves, and it has substantial deposits of coltan, used in capacitors for electronics, and lithium, which is becoming increasingly important as battery technology evolves. Essentially, if you're building an electric vehicle or any advanced electronics, you need minerals that come from Congo. Here's what actually happened. In late 2024 and early 2025, the Congolese government announced it would restrict exports of unprocessed minerals, particularly cobalt and copper, and require companies to process more raw materials domestically before exporting them. This wasn't a total export ban. It was a policy shift requiring mineral processing and value addition inside Congo, rather than shipping raw ore overseas. But global markets reacted as if Congo had shut off the tap entirely. The government framed this as economic sovereignty. For decades, Congo has exported raw cobalt ore to China, Belgium, and other countries, where it gets refined into battery-grade materials and sold at massive markups. Congo gets a fraction of the final value. Chinese refineries turn Congolese cobalt into materials worth 10 times what they paid for the raw ore. Belgian companies have been doing this for over a century. Congolese officials looked at this arrangement and decided it needed to change. The announcement triggered immediate alarm in Western capitals and among EV manufacturers. Tesla, Volkswagen, General Motors, and virtually every major automaker rely on cobalt from Congo for their battery supply chains. Over 70% of the world's cobalt comes from Congolese mines, and roughly 80% of that cobalt gets refined in China. So when Congo signals it might restrict exports, and China controls the refining, Western manufacturers face a potential choke point they cannot easily bypass. Battery production is concentrated in Asia, particularly China, South Korea, and Japan. Chinese companies dominate the entire supply chain from mining to refining to battery cell production. CATL and BYD, both Chinese companies, are the world's largest battery manufacturers. When Congo restricts raw material exports, Chinese refineries feel the impact first. But Western EV makers feel it harder because they depend on those same Chinese refined materials without having built alternative supply chains. Cobalt prices spiked on global markets immediately after the announcement. Prices that had been relatively stable suddenly jumped as traders anticipated supply disruptions. EV manufacturers started scrambling to secure long-term supply agreements. Some companies announced plans to shift to cobalt-free battery chemistries, though those alternatives are years away from mass production and come with performance trade-offs. This is where the geopolitical angle becomes critical. The United States and European countries have spent the last several years trying to reduce dependence on China for critical minerals and battery supply chains. They've offered financing for mines in Australia, Canada, and other allied countries. They've provided subsidies for domestic battery production. They've created frameworks like the Inflation Reduction Act in the US that incentivize sourcing materials from friendly nations. But none of that matters if Congo controls the cobalt and China controls the refining. Western countries can build all the battery factories they want. Without cobalt, those factories don't run. And if Congolese cobalt has to be processed in Congo or gets sold primarily to Chinese buyers, Western supply chains face a strategic vulnerability they cannot solve quickly. China recognized Congo's importance decades ago and invested accordingly. Chinese companies own or have stakes in many of Congo's largest cobalt mines. Chinese state-owned enterprises have poured billions into Congolese mining infrastructure. China built roads, railways, and processing facilities in mineral-rich regions. When Congo announced export restrictions, Chinese companies were already positioned to benefit because they have processing capacity inside the country. Western companies, by contrast, mostly relied on established relationships with Belgian firms that have operated in Congo since colonial times, or they simply bought refined cobalt on global markets without worrying about where it came from. That worked fine when Congo had no leverage. It stops working when Congo decides to assert control over its own resources. From Congo's perspective, this isn't just about economics. It's about sovereignty and the legacy of exploitation. Congo has been one of the most resource-rich and simultaneously impoverished countries on Earth for over a century. King Leopold II of Belgium turned Congo into his personal colony and extracted rubber and ivory through forced labor that killed millions of Congolese people. After independence in 1960, foreign powers and multinational corporations continued extracting minerals while Congo remained desperately poor. The eastern regions where most cobalt is mined have been plagued by armed conflict for decades. Militias fight for control of mining areas. Artisanal miners, including children, work in dangerous conditions for minimal pay. The profits flow to foreign companies and corrupt elites, while ordinary Congolese see almost nothing. Maternal mortality is among the highest in the world. Infrastructure is barely functional, and yet Congo sits on trillions of dollars worth of minerals. Congolese officials have watched this dynamic for years and finally decided to do something about it. Requiring domestic processing means more jobs in Congo. It means Congolese workers learn refining skills instead of just digging ore. It means capturing more of the value chain domestically, and it means foreign companies have to invest in Congo rather than just extracting and leaving. But there's a complication. Congo doesn't currently have the infrastructure or technical capacity to process all its minerals domestically. Building refineries and processing plants requires massive investment, stable electricity supply, and skilled labor. Congo's electrical grid is unreliable. Corruption is pervasive. Eastern provinces face ongoing conflict. So while the policy goal makes sense, implementation is difficult. Western governments responded to Congo's announcement with a mix of diplomacy and pressure. The United States sent officials to Kinshasa to discuss supply chain partnerships. European countries offered financing for processing facilities in exchange for guaranteed cobalt supply. But behind the diplomatic language, the message was clear. Congo needs to keep supplying cobalt to Western markets, and any disruption will have consequences. Those consequences could include financial pressure through the IMF and World Bank, which Congo relies on for budget support. They could include sanctions targeting Congolese officials accused of corruption. They could include support for opposition groups or destabilization in mineral-rich regions. Congo has seen all of this before. When leaders try to assert control over resources in the past, external powers intervened directly or indirectly to protect their interests. What comes next depends on several factors. If Congo can actually build processing capacity domestically and enforce export restrictions, it gains significant leverage over global supply chains. Chinese companies will likely help build that capacity because it benefits them to have processing happen closer to the mines. Western companies will have to decide whether to invest in Congo under terms they don't fully control or try to develop alternative cobalt sources. Alternative sources exist, but can't match Congo's scale. Australia has cobalt deposits but nothing close to Congo's reserves. The Philippines and Cuba have some cobalt but face their own political and logistical challenges. Deep-sea mining is being explored but remains experimental and environmentally controversial. Recycling batteries to recover cobalt is growing but can't meet current demand, let alone future demand, as EV production scales. Cobalt-free battery chemistries are being developed. Lithium-ion phosphate batteries don't use cobalt and are already common in Chinese EVs, but they have lower energy density, which means shorter range or heavier batteries. Sodium-ion batteries are another alternative being researched, but none of these technologies can fully replace cobalt-based batteries in high-performance applications yet. So in the short to medium term, Congo holds leverage. Western EV makers need Congolese cobalt. China, controls the refining. And Congo is asserting that it wants more value from its resources. The question is whether Congo can actually capture that value, or whether external pressure forces a retreat. History suggests pessimism. Congo has tried asserting resource sovereignty before. In the 1970s, President Mobutu nationalized foreign mining companies. The result was economic chaos, corruption, and eventually Western-backed structural adjustment that forced privatization. In the 2000s, President Kabila renegotiated mining contracts to get better terms for Congo. Foreign companies resisted, and international pressure eventually diluted the reforms, but this time might be different for one reason: China. In previous decades, Congo had limited options. If Western companies and Western-backed institutions applied pressure, Congo had nowhere else to turn. Now China offers an alternative. Chinese companies will invest in Congolese processing capacity. Chinese banks will provide financing. And China needs Congolese minerals just as much as the West does, maybe more, because China dominates global EV production. That doesn't mean China is a benevolent partner. Chinese companies have been accused of exploitative labor practices in Congo. Chinese loans come with terms that benefit Chinese interests, and China's own economic slowdown could reduce its willingness to invest heavily in Congolese infrastructure. But the existence of a Chinese alternative changes the negotiating dynamic. Western governments are responding by trying to build their own partnerships. The US has proposed financing for a rail corridor connecting Congolese mines to Atlantic ports, reducing dependence on routes that run through Chinese-controlled infrastructure. The EU has offered development funding tied to sustainable mining practices. But these offers come with conditions that Congo may not accept, and they require trusting institutions that have a long history of extracting resources without delivering development. The deeper issue is whether Congo's government can actually implement its policy. Building processing facilities requires electricity. Congo's power generation is inadequate. Corruption siphons off resources that should go to infrastructure. Armed groups control some mining areas, making investment risky. And internal political instability could derail any long-term strategy. If Congo succeeds in requiring domestic processing and capturing more value from its minerals, it sets a precedent that other African countries will watch closely. Zambia and the Democratic Republic of Congo together hold significant copper reserves. If both countries required domestic processing, global copper supply chains would face similar disruptions. Guinea holds major bauxite reserves used in aluminum production. If Guinea followed Congo's example, aluminum prices would spike. Resource nationalism isn't new in Africa. Countries have tried it repeatedly, but the global green energy transition creates new leverage. Western governments have committed to phasing out internal combustion engines. That commitment depends on EVs. EVs depend on batteries. Batteries depend on minerals. And those minerals come disproportionately from countries that have been exploited for centuries. Congo's announcement is a test case. If Congo can assert control over its resources and force better terms without being destabilized or economically crushed, other countries might follow. If Congo gets pressured into backing down or faces internal collapse, the message to other African governments is clear. Resource sovereignty is still not allowed. The ultimate question is whether Congo will finally benefit from the wealth buried under its soil, or whether this becomes another chapter in a long history of exploitation with a slightly different cast of characters. Chinese companies replacing Belgian companies doesn't necessarily change the fundamental dynamic if Congolese workers still earn subsistence wages while foreign entities capture the profits. But if Congo can build genuine domestic processing capacity, train Congolese engineers and technicians, create well-paying jobs in refining and manufacturing, and use mineral revenues to fund healthcare, education, and infrastructure, it would represent a genuine shift, not just for Congo, but for how resource-rich African countries engage with global markets. Western EV markets aren't shutting down tomorrow. Congo didn't impose a total export ban, but the panic in boardrooms and government offices reveals how fragile these supply chains actually are. One country controlling 70% of a critical mineral can reshape global markets just by threatening to process that mineral domestically instead of exporting it raw. That's leverage. Whether Congo can use that leverage to actually develop, or whether external and internal forces will prevent it, remains the real question. And the answer will determine not just Congo's future, but whether the green energy transition proceeds on terms that benefit the countries supplying the materials, or whether it becomes another extraction regime with a sustainability label attached.